Okay, nobody here knows me. I'm not from right in the immediate area, so I'll do a quick introduction here. And I also want to talk to you guys a little bit about why I'm up here talking about the Oak Island Money Pit to begin with, which is a story unto itself. Just put that up here so you can see the initial slide. My name is Dick Joltes. I've actually been involved in skepticism in some way, shape, or form for about 20-25 years now. Basically, my background is in a combination of things. History, archaeology, folklore is the things that I love to work on. But what I do for a day job is a lot more boring. I work for IBM. So I blame my involvement in this whole procedure, this whole movement on Mr. Spock. Okay? And the reason for that is this. Back in about 1979 or so, there was a show that some people, I don't even know if it made it to the New England area. I was living in Wheeling, West Virginia at the time, called In Search Of.
Yep.
Okay, the original In Search Of. Who narrated the original In Search Of?
Nimoy.
Oh, Leonard Nimoy.
Oh, Mr. Spock?
That's Mr. Spock himself. And I happened to run into the show on TV one day, and they were doing Oak Island. And I had never heard of it, and it sounded like a really cool concept, a really cool topic. And of course, Mr. Spock would never lie to you. I thought that the entire show was completely historical in nature, and this entire tale that he was spinning was absolutely grounded in fact, more fool-eyed. And thought it was really fun, but as I was an undergraduate at the time, and it really wasn't holding my interest more than in the area that I was really studying, I forgot about it for the next 10 years. Segued to roughly 1990. I'm working for Harvard University doing high tech, and at the same time I'm doing some graduate work in folklore and archaeology. There was an archaeology news group that was actually for professionals that people started asking, what about the archaeology of Oak Island? And I thought, wow, what a cool idea. Should look into that. So I went off and started investigating it a little bit and realized that there was no archaeology of Oak Island. No one had ever done anything actually on Oak Island at all in terms of archaeological work. A lot of people had done a lot of digging, but none of it was archaeology. But I made the mistake at that point. I done a lot of kind of bibliographic research and looked at some of the periodicals that were available. And I guess we don't have to go too close, so that's okay. I'll just talk louder. Basically, I looked around and got all this information together, and it put together just a flat text file of the bibliography. And I posted something to the news group saying, hey, I looked into this, and here's the information, and I have a bibliography if anybody is interested. That was a huge, grievous error on my fault, because just like everything else on the internet, that became a matter of public record, so I became the go-to guy for Oak Island. So I would start getting email messages to people saying, you have this information. Send out the bibliography. Finally wrote up what I call the critical analysis of Money Pit legend. Nailed that out to people that were text file they would request it. And then Glory of Glories, the web came around in around 1995, and I said, what a great idea. So I made everything into HTML, probably two of the original web pages that were ever hosted from Harvard University's website. Of course, my Oak Island bibliography and the critical analysis. And that opened the floodgates. Email all over the place, requests for interviews with magazines, all these other crazy things were going on. I was also doing a lot of work with the people, if anybody knows Snopes.com, the urban legend website. The guys who run Snopes, Barbara and David, are old friends of mine. We've known each other for about 25 years now. So we were all working together on urban legend research at the same time. And then things really got a little crazy, because I was in all these debates with various people who were saying, you're wrong about this, we have this other information, and back and forth over email. And I was moving to London in 1999, and there were rumors of British involvement in Oak Island. And I said, wow, not only am I going to be living in London, but I've got the National Maritime Museum right down the road. So I managed to wrangle a reader's card at the National Maritime Museum. And I had started to look into, and we'll see this more in the presentation, I had started to look into the background to see if I could find any original records in maritime history that mentioned this. Were the British ever there for any reason? Were the French there? Was anybody there on Oak Island? And one day, walking through the library, I happened to spot a whole raft of treasure books. I thought, hey, here's a great way to take a look at this. So I started tracing the legend back and found a lot of things, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Put these out on the website, and then started getting a lot more email messages, including requests for an interview from, there was a TV show called Encounters in the Unexplained, with the Unexplained, PAX TV, really bad TV show, but that's neither here nor there. So they actually showed up at my flat, and we did a 4-hour interview, of which, in the 1-hour show, I actually have a copy of it, I found it, so I'll show you a clip from it. Of the entire 1-hour TV show, 45 minutes of which was actual program as opposed to commercials. The skeptical portion, 1 minute long. Such is thing. And the things have kind of continued from that point. I've diverged into a lot of different areas. I have a small website. I've been really busy lately, so I haven't been able to do a whole lot of research, and I'm hoping to change that. So now, let's jump into this and we'll talk about it. And there's a reason that I call it History, Hoax, and Hype, is because all three are involved. This was a very interesting process for me in terms of kind of uncovering the legend, because it brought all three of my study areas, history, folklore, and archaeology together, because all three are involved when you're talking about Oak Island. Now first, who knows what Oak Island is? Who knows about the legend, basically? Okay, I'm going to go over this. Some people know a lot about it, some people are addicted to it, other people go, what are you talking about? Oak Island is this little tiny island that's just off the shore of Nova Scotia. It's actually not even an island anymore, because as you can see here, there's a little causeway that was constructed that was actually put in the 1950s that made it not an island anymore. So now it's kind of Oak Peninsula, so we won't talk about it. And on this island, allegedly, in 1795, now this is, I'm telling you the story right now. This is the story. In 1795, 3 boys, McGinnis, Smith, and Bond, or maybe Ball, I'm not sure, were on the island exploring. There was nothing there. And they found a tree, this tree, with a tackle block hanging from it. And underneath it was an area that looked like it had been disturbed, like somebody had been digging there. And there were marks on a big branch hanging out here that looked like somebody had carved something into it. So these guys, being curious kids, started digging. And 10 feet, or 3 feet down, they found stones. So they kept digging. 10 feet down, they found a log platform. So they kept digging. They got all the way down 25 feet after finding more logs, gave up because they couldn't get any more things out of the pit, and went home. 1804, they tell this story to some other people that they know. And they form a syndicate, otherwise known as a treasure hunting company. And they go back and they dig down even further into this whole thing and get down all the way to 100 feet. Oh, well, now it's not tidal. This is about the elevation of the money pit area is right here. The shoreline, this distance here is probably about a quarter mile, roughly. But it's about a 30-foot elevation. And this does play into how the legend works out. So don't get ahead of it. So they dig down to 100 feet. And at 95 feet, they run across a stone.
Whoa.
And on the stone are mysterious glyphs, and nobody can read them, but they say, we're right here, we're so close.
Aliens.
Aliens.
Yeah.
Aliens play into this too, but that's would be amazed. Where this leads. They find the stone. They say, we've got it knocked. And every night, according to the story, before they would quit work, they would take an iron rod and they would tamp it down into the hole to see if they could hit anything. And then this last night they hit wood again, after finding all these platforms all the way down and all these other things that led them to believe that they were on their way down to huge riches. They hit the woods, they say, we'll come back in the morning to do it. They come back in the morning and there's 40 feet of water in the pit. And they can't bail it out. So they give up and they go for it. Segue to 1849. Another group comes back, including some of the original diggers, and they dig again in a slightly different location. right next to the pit and try to get down to the same thing. Same thing happens. They get down to 100 feet. It fills up with water. The plot thickens. Go to 1861. Another group goes out. They're convinced they've got it knocked. They have a steam engine. They're gonna pump the water out of the hole. They're gonna dig another hole down next to it and go in underneath it. Don't ask me about the logic involved here. And they're gonna get the treasure because it's got to be right under that 100-foot level. They get down. They tunnel in, according to the story, underneath this existing pit. And just as they're about to find something, the water breaks through. They're chased out of the pit. The whole thing fills up. And this process basically continues over the next 100 and some odd years, up till the present day. There are still people messing around on Oak Island who are convinced that they're going to get this stuff. The pit is now, well, I won't say the pit, but the maximum depth that they have gotten to on digging is 200 feet. Okay. They've actually hit bedrock. Okay, so that's like the wind up here. So you've got the island, which is this little freckle of an island off the coast. This the causeway is 300 yards long, roughly. The money pit is right here. Now, part and parcel to this whole story is that there is a flood tunnel dug 100 feet down that runs water from a series of drains that are cleverly constructed here with coconut fiber mixed in with this stuff to wick water down into the hole, which is why the water keeps filling up in this hole. So that's the background, that's the setting. So there's the chronology. We have Smith, McGinnis, and Vaughn in 1795, roughly. 1804, the Onslow Company gets up to 100 feet. 1849, we think the Truro Company did this other thing. The Oak Island Association in 1861 gets down to about 120 feet and digs under this. By the way, if you hear money pit, it should actually be plural. A friend of mine who's done some work around the area and cataloged some of the existing excavations figures that there's somewhere in the vicinity of like 80 existing pits because they just kept digging in different locations and trying to get under it. And it gets even funnier later on. So, at about this time, the first known news articles appear. There's one small notice from 1849 where somebody had applied for a treasure license to dig on the island. And that's all. That's all we have from that period.
A what license?
A treasure license to be allowed to dig for treasure. They applied to whoever owned the island, that part of the island at that point, to be allowed to dig there. Okay. 1861, though, we started getting news articles, lots of them, in the Nova Scotian newspaper and various and sundry other places. And then, glory, somebody notices that the water is coming from the ocean. So they're still trying to dig it out, and there are all these things going on where they send down augers. So they start drilling holes down because they can't get the water out of the pit. They figure they'll drill down into whatever's down there and see if they can get something up. Now, another key element here is that at this time, allegedly, up on the auger comes 2 links from a gold chain and a little fragment of parchment. It's about that big.
2 what?
Parchment.
Oh, parchment.
That allegedly the letters VI were on it. It's on the parchment. Okay. These are all part of the legend. Okay. And there's all kinds of mysterious happenings that go on here. There's some guy that's working on the pit that pulls something off the auger, hides it in his jacket, and vanishes the next day, and nobody ever hears from him again. And allegedly he comes back and does something later on at the pit. Okay. 1893 to 98, Oak Island Treasure Company. They get to 160 feet, roughly. 1909, Old Gold Salvage and Wrecking Company get down there. And by the way, around this period, we have some illustrious people who were involved, at least tangentially. Admiral Richard Byrd was very interested in this. As a matter of fact, I have all of his old correspondence about it. My Oak Island box, by the way, I have 2 paper boxes that are stuffed with Oak Island background information. So this has been a long road. Richard Byrd and actually a future U.S. president went and dug on Oak Island as part of one of the salvage operations. Franklin Roosevelt.
Really?
I have pictures of Franklin Roosevelt standing at the pit. And then later on, this whole cast of characters gets in here and they get down to the 160-foot area The last guy that got in there, a guy named Robert Restall, back in the late 1950s, was a mining engineer who actually knew what he was doing. Okay, he actually knew what he was doing, but he also thought big. He's the guy who put the causeway there because he needed it in order to take his big steam shovels over. I wish I had photos included in the presentation, but I don't. He actually enlarged the pit area to something like 90 feet in diameter and 100 and some odd feet deep, and was still pumping water out of the bottom of the pit. Okay. But that thereby hangs a tale that will come in later. So you get up to that point, and then the last group that really did any major work out there was a group called the Triton Alliance. This is a guy named Dan Blankenship, a Canadian businessman named David Tobias, and I can't remember the third party, who did a bunch of work, and they actually, oh, here we go. There's Dunfield in there with his heavy equipment. Triton Alliance does borehole 10X. This is when they got down to 200 feet. And this was actually a caisson arrangement where they actually slid huge steel casings down into this whole area. Nodding, you probably know something about this. And got all the way down to 200 feet, got into subterranean caverns, claimed to see a skeletal hand in the water in the corner of a treasure chest. And about that time, Dan Blankenship almost died because the caisson collapsed, and he had to come up to the pit very rapidly. As a matter of fact, actually, 6 people so far are known to have died in the money pit for various reasons. Now, most recently, a little bit more Triton work, although these guys, Dan and those guys are all very elderly right now. They've sold their interest off to a shadowy group that I only know as the Michigan group. I don't know what they're up to. But I have not talked with any of these guys. They don't like me. If you mention the name Dick Joltes to anybody who's an Oak Island believer, they will start doing this and making kissing noises. Boston businessman David Mugar hired Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute to offer a 2-week survey. I found out about this through a third party. He's got a copy of the report. Basically, they told David, don't waste your money. And he walked away from it. Various groups negotiating, and nothing of value has ever been found. Oh, what a surprise. Now, some photos. These were all taken by me or other people. The one on the upper left here is the visible manifestation of all the old pits. Okay. Nobody knows, and they have tours on it about it periodically. Nobody knows where the original pit was. Somebody comes in and says, well, where's the original hole? They don't know.
Where's the tree?
Oh, the tree's been gone for 100 years. So we can't even verify.
It's in the hole.
It's probably in somebody's house. This is the shed where the infamous borehole 10X was constructed. This is a view down into borehole 10X. It was taken by a friend of mine about 15 years ago. And this was taken by me in 2009. The guy in the orange jacket is Danny Hennigar, who's a favorite nemesis of mine. He's actually a very nice guy, but we love to hate each other. And the most recent activity was quasi-legal on the island. They were actually drilling holes down into bedrock to try to figure out where to dig next. Okay? And the scary thing is, the black stuff that you're seeing around those holes right here and here, the salt. That's the bedrock from underneath the island. That came up from 220 some odd feet down. So they're really convinced that there's something down there, guys. And they're going to find it that nobody else has. Now, evidentiary claims. Now, these are all things that, this is, again, we're talking the story here. You can read any of the books about the money pit, and I have most of them. There's the inscribed stone, okay, 1804 roughly. The links from the gold chain in the 1860s. The oak chips that came up on the auger, they're said to be from a treasure chest. They could not possibly have been from any of the previous hoardings or oak beams that were used to reinforce any of the diggings that they were doing. The parchment frame. Cement or blue clay at various levels. They claim to have found cement along the way digging down into it. Fibers said to be from coconut rushes. Get into that. Old tools and chains. Again, what a surprise. The money pit has collapsed more times than you ever possibly imagine. Nobody knows where all the holes are. They dig down, they find an old pick. I've got pictures of a digger from the 1960s holding up a pick and shovel like, look, we found this. And what they don't say is that there's a label on the side that says property of former treasure hunting company. Okay. Now, other items of note. There's a stone triangle that used to be there that allegedly pointed directly to the money pit. We can no longer verify that because it was bulldozed back in the 1950s. But there's a slipway at South Cove. This is a legitimate feature. There is something there. I may actually have a photo of it someplace else in the presentation. And that's a legitimate feature that I would love to find out more about. The flood tunnels and fan drains. Again, I mentioned there's supposedly these tunnels coming in. And I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but this is somebody's made up schematic diagram of what the Oak Island money pit looks like. So you got the surface, you got all these levels going down here. Here's the bedrock. This has all supposedly been hacked up. There are tunnels down in here and caverns and things. And here are the drains coming in at like 100 and 130 foot levels. No one has ever verified that these drains exist. It's one of the dirty little secrets. Now, flood tunnels have never been verified. The chest has never been verified. A lot of people talk about the island being made of hard clay soil. This is absolutely true down to about 100 feet. Below that, this is a glacial till. It's a glacial island. Below that level, it's described by people in the 1860s as sand and boulder rocks. So it's easy for water to infiltrate. The elevation above sea level is about 30 feet, and they're down 100 feet. So we're at least 70 feet below the water table. Geologists have confirmed that this is anhydrite bedrock in the area, which is a type of limestone that is extremely water permeable. Once it gets wet, it just starts to flake off and dissolve into little flakes, and more holes open up. So that's that. Artifacts. These are known as the Spanish scissors. Okay. It's a common design found all over the world. Somebody found a piece on a pair on Oak Island, and they claimed that obviously they had to be part of the original excavation. It's an artifact. A friend of mine about 10 years ago said that if somebody found a coat bottle on Oak Island, they would claim it was the original excavation. The heart-shaped stone, somebody thinks that's an artifact of some sort. The thing down here is an old ruler. The Texan thing above it is a pack of matches that somebody put in there for scale, whoever took the picture. And these shots on the side here, I'm glad I left those in. Those are the slipway at South Cove. This is a legitimate feature. This does exist. Nobody knows why it was there. Nobody has any idea why it was there. They were digging at South Cove and they found this. It could be left over from anything. They call it a slipway. They don't even know. It was basically a wooden log ramp for pulling boats up out of the water and sliding them back down. So, and that, by the way, has Roman numerals on it, which of course sent a lot of money pit aficionados gyrations. What that could possibly mean. I'll leave it to your imagination. They have very good imagination.
What happened to the stone with the writing on it?
That's a critical key. Wait for it. Okay, Oak Island and Prince. The big work on this was a guy named Reginald Harris, who was a famous Canadian historian who wrote a big book about it in 1958. Been a raft of books ever since then. Everybody and their mother does a book about Oak Island if you're in kind of that believer camp. Darcy O'Connor is a good friend of mine. Lionel Fanthorpe. Has anybody run into Lionel Fanthorpe before? Lionel Fanthorpe is a very interesting character. He's done a lot of things about pirate banks in the Caribbean and various alien infestation things and all these other different books. And I actually was on a train to Edinburgh, Scotland in 2000, reading a Oak Island book. And this guy across from me said, "Oh, you're interested in Oak Island?" I said, "Yeah, why?" He said, "Well, my uncle wrote a book about it." I said, "Who's your uncle?" He said, "Lionel Fanthorpe." I went, "Okay." He said, no, really. The rest of the family is very normal." I found out something that I did not know. Lionel, who's a very nice guy, okay, he's a very, very nice gentleman, was a pulp science fiction writer before he became a writer of historical mysteries, which explains an awful lot. And I will say that Lionel's book on the Oak Island Money Pit is the only physical book that I have ever physically thrown across a room in total disgust. Most of these people, there are a lot of magazine articles. My bibliography is up on the website. I'll give you guys a pointer to the website at the end. There's too many articles to list. Popular Science, Wired Magazine, Collier's, all these other different people. Yeah, Collier's did Wired did a big article a couple of years ago. Lots of treasure hunting books. These are very useful for understanding the legend. There's a URL, and I actually have a PDF of this that I can give to you guys. Fiction. Obviously, you get some kind of a story like this, somebody is going to leverage it for fictional use. So there were a couple of books that were written in the 1870s. Treasure of the Seas, Old Garth. Nobody has ever read these things since. They're the typical treasure genre that would have been seen at that point, boys going off in an adventure. And I strongly suspect this is where the motif of three boys on an adventure crept into the Memphis story. Okay. More on that as we go. And this is actually an illustration from the showing. One of the sailors with the boys on their way to the island of the treasure. Theories. Oh, if we had theories about who did this. The original, Captain Kidd. Everybody loves Captain Kidd. This kind of fell out of favor about in 1800 when people started really finding more out about Kidd and what he had done and what he was involved in. In fact, he was never anywhere in the area. So his name got crossed off and it just became pirates. And there is a huge history of piracy in Lunenburg County and Chester area near Oak Island. So this does make some sense. There were a lot of people who were worked as what they, the term wreckers in terms of piracy. Wreckers were people who were very clever about what they did. Why get a boat if you have a really rocky shoreline and a donkey with a lantern on its neck? You lead the donkey back and forth on shore with the lantern on its neck, and somebody out at sea at night thinks that it's a ship riding at a safe anchor in a harbor, and they go, we'll go in with those guys.
Careful, Lunenburg is our sister city.
I'll try not to say too much.
We don't want you to get lynched on the way out of town.
So the ship goes in and is wrecked on the shoals, and the wreckers take all the cargo, do whatever with the crew and that sort of thing. So there is a history of piracy in this area. But there's no evidence of activity actually on the island. People have thought the British or French military. This is one of my early ideas. Somebody had told me that they thought the profile of what the money pit had been described as matched the British military munitions storage method of the period. If I looked into that, it doesn't hold any water. Of course, you don't have money pit. What's that?
Doesn't hold any water.
Doesn't hold, sorry. Okay, I think that out of the tape. And of course, you can't have a good historical mystery without having the Templar connection. As a matter of fact, Lionel Fanthorpe heavily promoted the Templar connection. There's a guy, a very nice gentleman who I think just passed away, a guy named Ken Leary, wrote a little book back in the 1950s that he gave me a copy of years ago, where he thought that Shakespeare's manuscripts had been buried down.
Oh, jeez.
And of course, this one I will say, this has not really made it into the popular literature, but an alien mind control device has been proposed as the article buried at the bottom of the money. And I'll tell you a quick aside, you'll love this about how I found out about this. One of the consequences of putting things on the web is people steal stuff off the website. So I have certain words and phrases that periodically I will go off and search for and see if anybody has grabbed any of my material. And I will tell you how bad this can get. I heard from my friends at Snopes about 5 years ago, they had to put an injunction against a guy who had taken their entire website, copied the entire thing, made it into a book, and published it under his own name. And couldn't understand why they were suing. At any rate, I did a search on one of my key phrases and found a pointer to a website that was of dubious origin. And it turned out to be, does anybody remember Laura Knight, or J.Z. Knight?
Oh, yeah.
Ramtha, channeling the ancient Egyptian warriors from the 70s. Her daughter Laura, is into this big kind of alien mind control thing. And they had actually taken an entire 3 or 4 page section of my website and pasted it onto their website. And we're using this to tie Oak Island to the remolecularized. Yeah, isn't that a great word? I had a hard time pronouncing that at the beginning. Okay, now skeptical view. Let's get over into our territory here. First of all, 1860, a guy wrote an article called The Oak Island Fall. This is in a Nova Scotian newspaper. I have a copy of it. I think it's actually up on my website right now, saying how ridiculous this is and how little sense it makes. Something very interesting. In 1867, one of the groups commissioned an engineer named John Brown to come in and do a complete study. He was also the guy who had done all of the borings with the augers to try to find out what was down there. A friend of mine up in Nova Scotia found a copy of his report, which is conveniently never mentioned by any group that wants to go dig on Oak Island. Why? Because it says at 140 feet we hit solid soil. There's nothing below 140 feet. Okay. And by the way, you know, this idea of not finding anything and nothing coming up on the auger, the guy in the report basically says, I have a habit when I'm drilling of taking like a 50 cent piece type of thing out of my pocket and throwing it into the hole, knowing that it will come back up on the auger. So if there was money down there, it would come up. Okay, there's nothing down there. They got this report, they stopped operations, and the report vanished. Okay, and it just turned up a couple of years ago, and we were very happy about that. And all of the Oak Island boosters kind of pulled their mustaches and did a curses for it again. 1911, Henry Bowden, who was a New Englander, was involved in the pit for a while, and then turned around and wrote an article that said it was a hoax. Back in the 1990s, yours truly started on the scene in this whole thing, and a couple of other people that have been involved in this. And then started doing the source review with Nova Scotia Archives and Records Management, trying to dig back into this, because the idea really hit, especially once I found all those treasure books, which were from 1880, and then 1900, and then 1920, and 1930. I was able to find articles on Oak Island in each one of them, and in every case, the articles were slightly different, and you could see the evolution of the legend over time. This was very interesting. So I started doing this source review, trying to find any primary documents that would lead me back to 1795. None. There are none. Even a good friend of mine named Paul Rocklowski, who lives up in Nova Scotia, he's the guy who found the John Brown report, has not been able to find anything going this far back. The dead end in 1861. Okay, with the one minor article in 1849. Reginald Harris had a lot of contradictory material that did not support the Oak Island story. He just left it out of his book. Okay, he just didn't mention it. That's one of the, yeah. Well, there are reasons for this, and jumping ahead slightly, I will say this: there's a reason that Oak Island is so popular among people in Lunenburg and Chester. The area is fairly poor. I was up there in 2009. I was the guest skeptic at one of their big meetings, and really got to see what the area looks like. It's very poor. Treasure hunting and the piracy connection and everything like that are part of their economy, really. Is keeping this kind of channel open and keeping people coming in is really the only thing that they have going on. So I can understand why they kind of dismiss some of the contradictory stuff. They want to keep the legend alive because I'll show you a short video later on, but to give you an idea, I was driving down the road at one point and missed the turn to the hotel. Got a half hour or a half mile down the road and found the local school for Chester, which is the closest town. The entire children's playground is pirate ship. It's all pirate themed. Everything in the area is pirate themed. So you can kind of keep that in the back of your head. So the conclusion is the original tale is a hoax. It's fairly obvious. Now, my friend Paul has his Oak Island Theories website. URL for that is at the end of the presentation. He's been doing a lot of really excellent documentary research, finding original land records, transfer deeds. He has theories that there was actually a conspiracy among some of the early families to promote this legend in order to get work into the area because they were so broke. Now my own approach, again, archaeology, folklore, history, the geology I get from other people. I got moldy beam bathymetry images from the area around Oak Island from a friend of mine up in Nova Scotia years ago, who basically said there's nothing under there except caves. This has all been about archaeology, search for primary evidence. Is there actually anything out there that we can find today that is a valid piece of physical evidence? No. Why? Because Back in 1960 or so, Robert Dunfield made the pit 90 feet in diameter, so all physical evidence was destroyed. There's nothing there, except on the shoreline. Folklore, comparative legend, that's a very rich area, and that led me into a whole different kind of field of endeavor that is coming up here very shortly. The geology, whether the structure of the island supports this, and history, search for primary materials. And I walked into this with no initial assumptions. I was doing a Fox Mulder. I really wanted to believe this, but I also knew that I was going to follow the data no matter what happened. Now, you asked about the inscribed stone. What happened to it? It's a critical element in this whole story. And this is a representation from somebody's website of what the pictograms are said to have looked like. And this is an illustration of how the tale grew in the telling and where a lot of this kind of spurious material came in. Allegedly found 1803, 1804, deciphered somewhere in the 1860s, 1870s, and then allegedly lost circa 1913. You talk to different people, they'll tell you different stories. In one case, it became a fireback stone in somebody's fireplace for years. Okay, and then was transferred to a bookbinder's shop where it was used as a hammering table for leather until the inscription was obliterated, and then it became somebody's stepstone on the doorway of their house, and then it vanished. Last sighting allegedly. Nobody knows. Nobody has any idea. Okay, because it was never photographed or sketched. Never depicted in any early accounts. I have every piece of material that was published from 1860 onward. There's no pictures of it anywhere. No drawings, no sketches, no nothing. Where did the symbols come from? There's the big question. And I finally found this in Admiral Richard Byrd's correspondence. Reverend A.T. Kempton, who he was, we don't really know. He was an Oak Island aficionado back in the 1930s. He actually lived in Cambridge. Wrote a letter to Admiral Byrd where he had talked about commissioning a story of Oak Island from a writer in Nova Scotia in the 1890s. He got this story, always wanted to go up and see if he could verify it. Paid the guy for the story. We don't know who wrote the story. Okay. The symbols came from this story. This is from the original manuscript, right here. This was letters to Admiral Byrd in the 1920s, I believe. Kempton also was in contact with some of the treasure hunters in the 1940s who thought he was a crank. There's the pot calling kettle black, but that's beside the point. But he was also in contact with Edward Snow. Anybody know Edward and Snow?
Oh, yeah.
Edward Snow wrote a lot of New England and
Made up some too.
Made up a lot. Ed was not
Lady in Black, a number of them.
I know. Ed put this in True Tales of Buried Treasure in 1953. That's the first ever appearance of these symbols in print. And ever since then, everybody has just copied and pasted them into their own books. That's where they came from. Okay, it's unbelievable how this thing kind of worked out. That is where they came from. And when I told the Oak Island believers this, they went completely ballistic. It was really kind of, I wish I'd been on site just to watch the scheme program. A lot of fun. Other little bits and pieces that have danced in and out of the legend over the years. 1880s and 1920s, in the treasure hunting books, we find these references to unusual species of plants on the island. First of all, you see this thing about live oaks. There are live oaks growing on Oak Island. Okay. Now, it's Oak Island. There should be oak trees there. But
They should be living.
and that's the key to understanding this. The whole little twist here is this. There is a species of oak called live oak. Okay, it's a southern U.S. species, right? It only grows in Virginia. It's Quercus virginiana. Is the actual name for it. Okay, somebody misinterpreted. There are only a few live oaks on the island. There are live oaks on the island. They shouldn't be there. They don't grow in that climate. Oh my God! Somebody put them there. Okay. So that was one of the things that kind of came into the legend, and then somebody later on saw a reason and said no, and took it out. It doesn't show up anymore. It's like it came in about 1890 and then dropped out in 1920. Red clover was said to be growing around the pit when it was found. It was unusual to the area and was never seen growing in Nova Scotia. I looked up red clover. It grows everywhere in Nova Scotia. So I have no idea where anybody got this idea. The diameter of the pit, depending on who you're talking to and which version you look at, it's 8 feet diameter. It's 12, 15 feet. One states it's 20 feet. The platforms originally started off being traced as live logs that were found at 15, 20, 25 feet, and then they became the work beams in later additions to the leg. The original location. Does anybody know what a tree nail is?
Yes.
No.
It's used to fasten ships together. It's a wooden peg
Right.
that is used in shipbuilding traditionally.
Yes, absolutely. And allegedly, the first account of the Oak Island legend says that the boys found a tree nail between two branches. So there was a wooden peg between two branches. That was, yeah, pretty much. Who knows? It's a legend. That evolved into a pulley, or in some cases, a branch with a burn mark, as if a rope with a heavy object had been thrown across. So this has all changed over time. But now we get into the fun part about this, and this is that branch theme that I was telling you about. This is where the folkloric research led. Money digging. Come to find out, about 5 or 6 years ago, I ran into a couple of really good scholarly articles on this. There was an entire thing, a supernatural economy, they call it, in the New England, Nova Scotia area from the latter 1700s through the mid 1800s at least. Supernatural economy was this. Somebody would walk into town. I'm a money digger. I know how to find money. I will prove it to you. I will take a coin and bury it out in the field, and I will go find it. And this guy would go find the coin buried in the field, and that would be how he would prove his bona fides. Okay? And then they would get money from locals because there were legends all over the place of pirate gold, of leftover money from British and French military expeditions that had dumped money someplace.
Upstate New York is where Joseph Smith made his start.
Precisely.
He claimed to be a money
Exactly. As a matter of fact, we went through Joseph Smith because there was an indication for a little while that we thought that Smith Jr. or Smith Sr. might have been involved in the pit, but it turned out to be a false lead.
Where's there ever been a military operation that had leftover money? I don't think that's.
It sounds
Yeah.
un-American.
Well, I actually ran across one legend as part of this research. There was a fort in upstate New York that had been abandoned by the British during the French and Indian Wars, and there was a legend that before the British left, they had dumped like some huge pile of gold down a privy shaft. And there were people in there digging 50, 100 feet down in the shaft trying to find gold.
Sounds like a good joke on the Yanks.
Exactly. There were also, if I mentioned upstate New York, I have a really good book of upstate New York legends that include a lot of things about Native American gold. There was a massive belief at this point that Native Americans had gold mines out in the middle of the wilderness, and there are stories of white people being blindfolded and taken out and shown this vast wealth and spending the rest of their lives trying to find it afterwards. Okay. So there were all these local beliefs that these money diggers keyed on. And this is a piece of art, which you can probably see a little bit, from 1832. It's called The Money Diggers. And it's a classic scene from this. You see, so I'll just point this out because it's kind of dark. There's a guy here who's the money digger who's kind of shivering back like this. There's a guy over here who's got his arm up and he's running away from the pit, and there's a guy over here who's trying to get out of the pit. Because the usual thing here was that the money digger would take these people out at night, and they would be given very specific instructions. Okay, you are not to speak for the entire time until the treasure is completely uncovered. It has to be completely out of the ground before you say a single syllable, because there are supernatural beings protecting this treasure. And if you say anything, or if you break the spell, or if you don't do all the things that I've told you, they will snatch it back and it will be gone again. And there are actual accounts of these guys having this chest almost out of the ground, and somebody says, "We got it!" And suddenly the spirits cry out. When I first read about this, all I could think of was snipe hunt. It's like an ancient version of a snipe hunt. Taking people out in the woods and getting them a little bit drunk and leaving them out there overnight. So, but this was a very, very common thing. I have piles and piles of instances of money digging cases going on. There was one in Maine, it was called Lambert's Fall. Lambert's Folly. This guy named Lambert came into town claiming this ability. He claimed he had this unfailing ability to make money. He had all these banknotes that he would literally light cigars with and everything. Persuaded the townspeople to give him pretty much everything that they had, and then vanished overnight into camp. Okay, and every year this town still, maybe not anymore, but used to have a St. Lambert's Day celebration. Okay, so just to tell you how embedded this is in popular culture. So there was definitely a context around this. Common treasure motifs. He set to work with alacrity and a shovel, and soon he unearthed the flat stone and an iron bar. Flat stone, iron bar. This is not from the money pit legend. This is from a random treasure legend that I found. An old saying has been handed down among the people of the island, from whom they came they had forgotten, that was to this effect: dig 6 feet and you will find iron. Dig 6 more and you will find money. If you go back to those symbols, it says 40 feet below 2 million pounds are buried. Does that motif sound familiar? This was extremely common to have this. Rumors were circulated that a long auger had been made that had bored through the deck of the sunken ship. When the auger was brought to the surface, pieces of silver were caught in the thread. Exactly from Oak Island. Same thing. That's from, actually, and you'll love this because we bring Captain Kidd back into it very briefly. There's actually an old legend from the Hudson Valley in New York that after Kidd was executed, his crew brought one of the ships up the Hudson with a bunch of money on board, and the ship sunk in the Hudson, and the money is still down there, and they've been trying to get it, and that's where that came from, is that legend. So Kidd's pirate ship isn't in Oak Island, it's in the Hudson River. Maybe. Divination plays a big role in this. Money digging involves a lot of divination. We mentioned Joseph Smith. The thing on the side is one of his seer stones. Now, a seer stone, I should have brought a hat. Envision somebody taking this little stone, which fits in a pocket, and they take their hat off, and they put the stone in their hat, and they put their face down in the hat, and then they walk, and they look. And that's how they're seeing treasure.
Right.
Okay. This was believed in. The same way this guy's got dowsing rods. This was used as a really common theme for finding treasure back in the day. And I don't know how we're doing on time here, but I'll give you guys a quick side story. A couple of years ago, when I was still living down in Pennsylvania, we had a problem with our sewer system in our front yard. And the guy came in and did a little evaluation, said, yes, it's blocked, and I'll try to find out where it is. And I said, okay, here's where the pipe comes out of the yard, here's the street, it's probably right along here. Okay, what does he do? He brings out a pair of dowsing rods. And he's walking around like this. And when he gets over the area, he says, oh yeah, it's right here. And he puts a stick in the ground. And I said, okay. So the next day, I took the stick out, but I marked the location because I'm sneaky. The next day, one of his accomplices came back. This is from a major plumbing company. He said, oh, I'll find it for you. I'll do this. He pulled out his pair of rods, and he walked around, and he got to a similar area and marked it. And I said, okay. And I said, if you think that I'm going to let you dig a big honking hole in my front yard based on that, you were wrong. What else you got? Because we didn't know where the pipe was. And they said, well, we have a camera and with a radio sender on it that we can put down. I said, that sounds better. So they put the camera with the radio on it down and ran it down the pipe to where it needed to go. And they set the thing off, and the guy starts walking down to where the sticks are. Oh, it's not here. I said, no surprise. 60 feet away, down at the opposite end of the yard is where the pipe came. So, but this was used very commonly. As a matter of fact, the reason we thought the Smiths might have been involved was one of the pits, it was dug in the 1870s, was known as the Fanny Young pit, which was named from the clairvoyant that told them where to dig it. Now it turned out, this is a coincidence that we kind of ran into when we were looking at this. It turns out that Fanny Young was also the name of Joseph Smith Jr.'s 32nd celestial wife.
Yes.
Okay. So
You know all
we
their
looked at it and
names?
said, wow, is there a possibility there? But it turned out to be different fanny gun. So we definitely have a lot of things here. This is, again, more accounts from the area. I mentioned the fanny gun pit here. The Oak Island 1893 money pit prospectus talks about a guy with a mineral rod walking around figuring out where to dig. Okay. This is another thing. 2 little girls in New York could see by looking into tumblers of water any hidden treasure or stolen property.
Dang.
This was, yeah, aren't they good? Where's Sylvia Brown? Okay. So you have that going on. Geologic aspects. Again, the island is part of a glacial drumlet. There's bedrock down there. Glaciers came in, dumped a lot of sand and boulders, retracted, and then glacial till got laid down over top of that along with a lot of clay. Okay, so there are definitely layers out there. We know that. It is hard clay down to about 100 feet, and then it's sand and boulders underneath that, which is extremely susceptible to water infiltration, so that's really obvious. The bedrock's anhydrite, which I mentioned. The pit area is very unstable. It is right on the edge of what is known as the Windsor Formation. And do I have that? Yes. This is actually, there's the island. This is the Windsor Formation, which is the edge of a major limestone subterranean outcropping, going right through there. The money pit's right there. There's another place that's known as the Cape Ann pit, where a big sinkhole formed in 1878. It's right over here. And then there's a major area of subsidence over here, and this entire area is rife with this type of subsidence. Okay. And Dunfield, back in the 1960s, knew this. This is one of his drawings. This got left out of all the histories that have been written about the money pit. Okay, they don't talk about that. So, some conclusions here. This is where I am with the whole thing. There were a lot of cases that I found in the literature of people going off doing limestone mining in this area, because this anhydrite, if you roast it, is great stuff for cement. Okay, it's great stuff for mixing cement. It's also really, really good for fertilizing your ground. Okay, so it's like liming your ground. They also had a lot of cases of people saying, well, we found a sinkhole, that probably means that there's limestone down here. Let's go down to the bottom of the sinkhole and start digging, because we're pretty much guaranteed to finding rock down here that we can mine and use. As far as I'm concerned, the money pit probably started off as somebody's private little limestone mine. And it was very disappointing. And despite the millions of dollars that have been sunk into this hole, that's probably all it is. This is also a potential explanation for the cement that they said they found during digging, because this anhydrite will naturally calcify into stuff that looks like cement. Now, in the final little summary on this, a couple of very suspicious dates here. And 1849, that little scrap of paper that we have with the request for a treasure digging permit. 1849, what happened that year? The California Gold Rush. 1861, something that I did not know until I was looking into this. As a matter of fact, even more hilarious than this is it's right next to a money pit article in the Nova Scotian newspapers that I have from the period. There's an article about Oak Island, money pit, people digging, shares selling at tremendous amounts of money, and right next to that is a story about the Nova Scotia gold pits. There was a major gold strike in Nova Scotia at this point too. Everybody was trying to get in on this. Okay. So afterwards, the tale grew in the telling. People got a hold of it. A lot of really uncritical writers would build on each other's mistakes from the previous eras, and they have manufactured this entire mythology around this island, up to and including J.Z. Knight and her remoleculars. More information. The top one is my website, which is sadly out of date, but has a lot of good information on it. And Oak Island Theories, you have to register for access, but that's Paul Raklowski's repository of original documents that he's been scanning in and making available, and there's a lot of discussion on there. Paul's done some. Paul started off as a believer and desperately wanted to find out what was really going on Oak Island. He and I got into a lot of arguments back in the early 2000s. And today, he is a skeptic in all but name. He won't admit it, he won't say the word, but we all kind of look at him and say, Paul, you are. And he's saying, oh, no. But he's done some great work.
Dick?
Ma'am.
Who owns the island?
At this point, it's actually, the entire island is owned by various people. Okay, the Michigan group, quote unquote, owns the area where the money pit exists, and the areas around it. There are some private residences on the island that people have owned for years. The rest of it is basically inhabited, but it's private, and they don't let people drive out there. You can only get out there if you're just an interested party. You can only get out there once or twice a year for guided tours.
Is there still a lot of tourist activity there? Does people go and look at the area?
Well, there used to be a group, the Cook Island Treasure Society. People who invited me up in 2009. That would every year they would have their Explore Oak Island Day, where they would have events and they would have guided tours, and they had permission to take people out on the island. These days, I'm not sure exactly what the situation is, but it's things do happen. It's sketchy. You really have to get fishing. And now, just to sum things up a little bit, let me just give you a couple of quick videos here. Of course, we have to have some less boring.
It may not have been as rough as the Thriller in Manila or the Rumble in the Jungle, but the Oak Island Tourism Society's promotion by the Oak...
Now let me pause this in just a brief second here and point out a couple things. Notice that X? This is the Oak Island. This is the Oak Island Inn, which is actually a fairly nice resort that's right next to the island. X marks the spot. This is the motif on all of the corner blocks all over the hotel. And if you also notice, there's our pirate buddy standing in the background as the reception area. So these guys definitely know how to trade on the legend. This is 2009, by the way.
It certainly was a spirited affair. Part of the Oak Island Day's annual celebration, the Commotion by the Ocean is just one event planned by organizers like Danny Henniger.
Well, this weekend we have a lot of events going on. Of course, the major event is tours of Oak Island. People come from around the world to see Oak Island, and thankfully the Oak Island Tourism Society, in cooperation with the owners, are able to offer that. And on Saturday evening, of course, we're having an event called Commotion by the Ocean, which we've been looking forward to a great deal. What we have is two skeptics who think that the story of Oak Island is absolute foolishness. Talking or debating two believers who think, you know something, there is something to the story of Oak Island. Myself and a researcher from the Maritime Museum in the Atlantic are on one side, obviously with skeptics. And then two of the believers are going to be debating us. We have a series of 10 questions that we've each side formulated 5. We'll be going through those and having some fun with it.
We were having a lot of fun.
Oak Island continually grows in the telling, as every excavation and book embellishes the last round of evidence with their own additions, feeding still further exaggeration.
So what's different from these books than, say, the Bible? 1970, I was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal in New York. And I was up here doing a story on the fishing industry in the Maritimes, Atlantic provinces. And I was staying in the Chester area, heard about this, and went back and met Dan Blankenship and did a feature on it, and I did a book on it. And then I became obsessed. I started off as a non-believer. I would have been sitting over there back before 1970.
We can move you.
And I switched sides.
How does one explain the proven existence of coconut fiber on an island 1,400 miles north of the nearest coconut tree?
That was one of the things that I just made me believe it. What was coconut fiber doing on the island?
Everything that anybody ever finds on their island, they automatically just somehow related to the money thing.
Oak Island, more than anything else, reminds me of that game we used to play as a kid called Telephone. You know, where you get something in somebody's ears like, isn't it cold and windy today? And we'd go around the room one ear to the other, and we'd come back as Gordon and Cindy are having an affair in the woodshed. That's a complete exaggeration. So,
And while neither debate team was able to sway the other, the clear winner
was the sold out audience.
From the Oak Island Resort, I'm Tim Rees Horton for SoShoreNow.ca.
And there we go. Questions? Comments? Anything?
There actually was no, oh, sorry.
Oh, wait. You'll be next. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just throwing out, you're referring to Captain Kidd pretty much with the assumption that he was a pirate.
Yeah.
There was in fact a great deal of ambiguity, legally and otherwise, and it's really very seriously questionable whether he was.
Yeah, he was primarily a privateer.
Yeah, and granted there was a gray area and he may have crossed.
From all the accounts I've ever seen, he definitely crossed it. But and for those who don't know, Kidd was actually hanged in London. So, whether
Arguably without a fair trial,
Oh,
and with the
definitely.
deal covered up. It's
Yeah.
actually it's a fascinating case.
yeah,
But I guess what I'm
because
leading up to is that there was a great deal of activity in terms of, ranging from pure outright terrorism to the kind of privateering that maybe crossed the line.
yeah.
And that indeed, there probably is some history and archaeology to be dug up.
I think there's definitely some history around it. Archaeology.
Archaeology is like they ruined it.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing on the island they're going to find. There's some legitimate features on the island. That slipway that I mentioned earlier, the fan drains that I mentioned that are in one of the coves, those have actually kind of been verified as a local feature. Somebody actually had dug down there, and there's coconut fiber. How it got there is anybody's guess. Okay, but coconut fiber was used as dunnage in ship cargo for 1,000 years. So we go back to our records theory. Did somebody wash up a bunch of boxes of stuff on the shore from a wreck or a pirate event and dump all the dunnage, coconut fiber, which is used to pack things in dockers back then, out onto the beach? We don't know.
There isn't any either like local history or local records about what people did on that island. Apparently the island's been used by humans for a period of time.
Well, that's one of the other areas where the legend definitely does not match the history. Early on, I should have presented this a little bit more, but we only have so much time here. And I mentioned that the original story talks about 3 boys on an adventure, okay, and implying that the island was uninhabited. It wasn't. The island had been divided up into lots, like 50 years before that, as part of the shore and grant. And this is okay. Another little piece of the puzzle here. Dan McGinnis, who was one of the major protagonists in this. We get the story of him as a kid out there rowing out to the island with his buddies and finding this tree. No, Dan McGinnis, as far as we know, was about 34 years old. He was a former royalist who had accepted deportation back to Nova Scotia after the American Revolution was over. He actually owned one of the lots on the island at the time. And Smith, his family owned other lots on the island. So the island was inhabited. There were farmsteads there already at this point. As a matter of fact, we have pretty good authentication on that because a friend that I met actually through this research, a guy named Kel Hancock, is a direct descendant of Dan McGinnis, and he's been looking up all this genealogy trying to verify it.
So I'm not too surprised if you could find something for both on Nova Scotia Island.
There's a lot of data out there. One of the things that I've always wanted to be able to do was to take the time to go out and just sit in the Nova Scotian archives and go through all of this material and see if we can put something together. Happily, Paul Ricklowski's doing a lot of that now. And we're starting to unravel a lot of these shadowy land deals that went on among people and possible rationale behind the whole original hoax.
When you say hoax, you mean to imply that somebody really, you don't mean to imply that somebody deliberately tried to trick people, it's just more, it builds as
Potentially, I mean, there's the potential that the original hunt, I would place that at 1804 because the people who invested money in that original digging in 1804 were rich people. So I would suggest that there's definitely a good reason to think that there were some guys out there who knew that they could make some money by promoting the legend. Okay. Now, whether that was absolutely intentional or whether they really believed it, maybe they had been sold by bill of goods by somebody else, we have no idea at this point. But there was actually a series of satirical letters that were printed in Nova Scotia newspapers in the 1820s, and I can't even pronounce the name. It's the stepsure letters. It's named, I can't even say the word. It's on the website. And one of them talks about this guy and the Chester folks who had gone off and dug so deep looking for treasure that they actually fell in with the devil and were lucky to escape with their tools, that sort of thing. So we know that there was a context of some kind of treasure scammery going on in this area at this point.
Oh, no, you answered, so they did actually find coconut fiber?
Yeah.
And people laid their hands on it? It's-
People have, as a matter of fact, I interviewed a couple of the guys from Woods Hole.
Yes.
And the scientists who went up there, and I said, did you actually see this? And they said, okay, here's the context. They took us off to the cove, they dug down a little bit in the sand, and they reached down and they pulled some stuff out, and it looks like it's coconut fiber. We're gonna have it analyzed. But it looks like it's coconut fiber. So there is stuff out there. What it's doing there, how it got there, does it trace back to anything? One of the, as I mentioned earlier, that whole thing about this tunnel system starting from the shoreline and like water going down and into the pit. Robert Dunfeld actually dug down and verified that there is a vertical like sump way there that's like filled with rocks, but he also verified that it doesn't turn. It goes down like 80 feet and then stops. So that's another kind of interesting, legitimate, potentially archaeological feature. What's that doing out there? There was another lady who I forgot to mention named Millie Evans. And you can tell how long I've been doing this because I know the cast of characters, who wrote a book years ago where she proposed that the area around the money pit was actually a fish processing station, where they're bringing in fish and like drying them on the shoreline and then taking them up, or something like that. There are all kinds of possible explanations, but nobody's tracked down the origins.
Well, this presentation reminds me of one of these legends in Europe that is still alive. Occasionally when I read Czech newspapers, I read about the continuing hunt for Nazi gold. Nazi gold supposedly is still hidden somewhere, and the major territory for this search is what is today's Czech Republic.
Okay.
The reason is because this was the territory which was in the Nazi hands up to the end of World War II, up to May 9. This search has some roots in reality.
The mines?
Well, at the end of the war, a Nazi officer approached Americans in Europe, in West Germany, and said, I know about a Nazi cage that is hidden on Czech territory with great many important documents. American approached the Czech government and said, we would like your permission to uncover this. And there was no interest. It was supposedly a hoax.
Yeah.
So the American intelligence, and it was in 1946 before CIA was established, this was still OSS, sent a team of intelligence officers with this Nazi officer on Czech territory. They uncovered the Štěchovice archive, which was a very famous place about 40, 50 miles from Prague, and uncovered 30, 40 huge boxes filled with super secret Nazi documents. Put them on trucks and brought them to Germany. And only at that moment, Czech police and counterintelligence was alerted. Immediately, American government was asked to return the documents. They refused, but after several weeks when they photocopied everything, they sent something back. Nobody knows how much, but they sent back. Anyhow, this was one of the most important discovery of Nazi documents and activities during the war. And then there was this search continued in the following years and decades, searching for gold, specifically gold, and supposedly in the territory around Štěchovice there is another place where the gold is hidden. And so occasionally even Americans now, some Americans apply for the permission to search for this treasure. Nobody has been able to discover it, but this hunt continues.
I'm not surprised. These stories just don't die out very easily. As a matter of fact, one thing I didn't mention, there's so much context around this, but I was talking about the whole treasure digging industry that existed. I mean, Ben Franklin wrote about the treasure money digging concept. One of the other, there were like 4 primary things. There were military treasures that had allegedly been left behind, Native American gold, pirates, and there was a persistent belief in the early United States that Native Americans were actually, among certain groups, that Native Americans were the lost tribe of Israel. Okay, and that they had brought lots of money and treasure and maybe biblical artifacts with them, and that those were buried somewhere in the Northeast. So there was a foundation of Mormonism, the gold plates and everything like that. That whole thing comes out of that persistent belief that one of these tribes was the lost tribe of Israel. So it's just, the belief still cruise around here and there. Every now and then I run into it. It's really interesting to see what people will believe is out there. Good. Yes, they did.
That's gold digging, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dick. I think
Well, but